race fans, my name is Taylor and welcome to Above the Yellow Line, the show where we talk about all the updates, theories, news, recaps, and more of the NASCAR Cup Series. We have a new look to the channel. I hope you guys really like it. I enjoyed spending some of my time making these new graphics. I think the letters pop better. I'm gonna keep playing around with things, I think, till I find something that sticks, but for now, I think these are pretty cool. Hope you guys really like it, but that's not the point of today at all. Today, we are focusing on a pre-race show for the Geico 500 at Talladega Superspeedway, you guys. We are back super speedway racing, late racing at Talladega. I'm super excited after last week. I'm really hoping we get some action on the track. But before we jump into track facts, odds, and my race winning predictions, we have a few updates to discuss. So without further ado, let's dive right in. As always, before we jump into this weekend, we have to pull back to last weekend at the Toyota Owners 400 at Richmond. We're going to start by looking at Jeff Luck's poll here. 52.7% of fans thought this was a good race at Richmond. We are teetering on the edge of a 50% race here. As you can see, it ranks 7 out of 10 of all the Richmond race polls that Jeff has done, with the highest race all the way back in 2016. I'm noticing a trend here with Jeff's polls having the highest rating in 2016. Besides the point, at least this was better than last year's. Also, TV viewership says that as well. Sunday's race brought in 3.315 million viewers and received a rating of 2.0. Last year's brought in much less when Richmond was part of the playoffs. Last year only brought in 1.738 million viewers and a rating of 0.25. That is a really bad rating, you guys. So it's good to see this one this year being extremely better than last year's. Leaps and bounds above last year's, because let's be honest, Richmond as a playoff race, I don't know who thought of that. I don't know if it was because COVID changed the schedule. I actually don't think that was the case, but I don't know who thought of this. It's a horrible idea. Don't like it. And then if we look at all the TV ratings this season, courtesy of RacingNews.co, this is a list of every single rating from every single race this season so far, and I am shocked again to see that Richmond is not the lowest rated race this season so far. Pretty shocking from Richmond. I'm also very disappointed to see that Martinsville was rated pretty low. I know we had a rain delay to work around, but Martinsville is such a fun track, and I think if you were to put out a poll to all NASCAR fans unanimously, I think Martinsville would be in the top 3 of tracks. Don't quote me on that, but seeing it rate that low in TV standards was pretty disappointing. Something that wasn't disappointing is we only had 2 teams this weekend come out with fines. It was William Byron and Cody Ware with $10,000 fines for one loose or missing lug nut. So not that bad going into this weekend. No one's crew chiefs were ejected, so we don't have to go to Talladega with any missing team members as far as I know without COVID restrictions, which is a good thing. Those are the final updates from last weekend's race. Let's jump into general updates from the NASCAR world and beyond. Announced Thursday, Netflix is in production for a new documentary series featuring Bubba Wallace. According to this tweet by Adam Stern, there is no title or release date yet, but according to him, it will take us behind the scenes of Bubba's first year at 23XI Racing. This will be an interesting documentary for sure. I'm curious to see what it will all be about and what exactly it will highlight, because as you all know, I think 23XI Racing has struggled a lot this season, and I think the only thing they can really highlight from the team right now is just their struggles in getting started as a new team. In general, new teams have struggles getting started, but I do know that this documentary will focus on NASCAR as well and their efforts to advocate for inclusion and equality within and outside of the NASCAR community, according to an article from NBC Sports. I do, however, think it will be interesting to take a look at the 23XI team in their first year and see how the team was put together, and for me at least to see how the team is or isn't melding together, kind of taking us behind the scenes of what we don't see or hear during a race week. And I say that because last week Bubba talked about his frustrations over the radio. I mentioned in the last podcast saying that his team is giving up on him, so I think if that could be mentioned in the documentary, I don't know if they're going to mention that or go for that angle. Like I said, I don't know what they're kind of going for right now, none of us do, but it would be really interesting to hear as a fan what's been going on behind closed doors. I will say I do wish that the first NASCAR documentary on Netflix or something to this scale, I wish it was about NASCAR as a whole, or that they did kind of a Drive to Survive type thing. I know I've seen that all over Twitter. The FS1 series is doing Drive to Survive, but maybe this will be a good start to get us there. I would say getting NASCAR starting to go through bigger streaming services, starting to get people kind of interested in that. I'm also not sure if NASCAR is a series where Drive to Survive works. I don't know if we have the personalities that are willing to do that. But nevertheless, I think it would still be super cool. So that news was announced Thursday. Also announced Thursday, the Superstar Racing Experience Series have been getting their production days and getting their media days out of the way this week. We have gotten fancy driver pictures, car pictures, and then they came out and announced that 19-year-old Truck Series driver Hailie Deegan will be joining the series for a few races. Those races have not yet been determined as far as I know, but I think this will be very exciting and also very interesting at the same time for a couple reasons. The point of SRX is to watch our old favorite drivers race. I also want to mention at this point that I think in all my podcasts I have said SXR instead of SRX. It is SRX. I will say I literally did not catch this until now, so if I've said it wrong this whole time, I apologize, but as I was writing this podcast, I realized that I'm pretty sure I've been saying it wrong, but it is SRX, Superstar Racing Experience Series. Like I'm saying, we're going to go back on track here. The point of this is to watch our old favorite drivers race. So we have 40-plus-year-old men in the field, and then we have a 19-year-old young woman. It's just super odd, to be honest, but don't get me wrong, I'm excited to see how she does with these legendary drivers. I think it's going to be a battle between skill and a battle between youth. I think that's going to be an interesting concept to play up this summer as they go racing, but it's a little odd. I mentioned this last podcast, I mentioned the Superstar Racing Experience Series. I'm crossing my fingers I can go to one of these races, and I'm hoping it's Eldora, and I think, knowing Hailie Deegan's dirt background, that might be a race that she attends. I also want to mention here a theory I have based on nothing at all, but I don't think she's going to be the only young gun racing in this series. I think there's room for a lot more drivers, and if they're letting her in, I'm curious to see if they're going to have anyone else in the field to be announced at a later date. I'm just saying right now, I don't think she's going to be the only one, but I could also be completely and utterly wrong. Again, I am still curiously excited to see this series start racing this summer on CBS. Speaking of things on the screen, let's move over to the iRacing Pro Invitational Series NASCAR. Drivers went to virtual Talladega on Wednesday night, and this was the second virtual event for racing that I've seen in my lifetime. I cannot stress enough how fun it is to see these drivers out of their element, or I guess in their element, out of their fire suits, taking things a lot less seriously. The broadcast seemed to suffer a little bit from that, as things were just pretty chaotic. Mike Joy, of course, always with his professionalism, really held things together. And it's a little bit difficult when one of your commentators is driving in this event. Let's talk about the lineup for this event, which is on your screen here. All the charter drivers had the opportunity to participate in this, and then we had Clint Boyer, then we had Dale Jr., Timmy Hill, Jesse Iwuji was your fan vote to join this race. And then you're going to see this. It is not a typo. It is Keelan Harvick, the 8-year-old son of Kevin Harvick, a championship driver, racing with the big dogs at virtual Talladega. And if you don't know Keelan Harvick's story, yes, he is racing right now. He actually, fun fact, broke his arm or his wrist or something like that, maybe his hand. Well, he has a cast on his hand. He had his cast specifically molded so he could go back racing. So he has his cast perfectly molded to fit his steering wheel. If that doesn't scream dedicated to you, I really don't know what does, because he was racing with that cast in his hand. He was like sitting up straight. He was racing with everyone. It was super fun, because I don't think we're ever going to see a day where he's racing side by side with his dad in the NASCAR Cup Series or trucks or whatever. So it was really fun to see him race side by side with his dad. I believe Keelan even got through the massive late race wreck that happened in virtual Talladega. And after that, Brad Keselowski won the event with a victory margin of 0.106 seconds. And we'll talk about the stats of the drivers a little bit later, but I'll tell you right now, I'm not surprised Keselowski won virtual Talladega at all. Keelan finished 38th, if you're curious. Other notable finishers were Dale Jr. finishing in 7th, and last year's Talladega Pro Invitational winner was Alex Bowman. He finished in 5th this time. So that was the iRacing event. Before we jump into the real thing, there's a story I want to mention here. We're going to end with this for our updates. Not a whole lot to talk about this week, but the lineup for this weekend's race was changed on Monday. I'm going to talk about Jennifer Jo Cobb. She is a Truck Series regular. She was set to make her Cup debut this weekend in the number 15 Rick Ware Racing Chevrolet at Talladega. She would have become the first woman to compete in the Cup Series since Danica Patrick all the way back in 2018. I say all the way back in 2018 because it feels like forever ago. It kind of was, but also, there's a point to clarify here. One, if you remember back at Martinsville, the Rick Ware team had a scuffle between their drivers, James Davison and Cody Ware. They fought back and forth, ended up kind of wrecking each other out, getting out of the way. There was a lot of bad blood between those two. This decision was made prior to that event, so it's not like she was going to replace James Davison in his car because of that issue. That was not a factor for her going in the car. Reason 2 for why she's not racing in Talladega, and I think you could just figure that out by now, saying she was set to make her Cup debut, so I'm not spoiling anything right now, but also because last weekend at Richmond, she got into it with Norm Benning, and they were black flagged, and they had to go to the hauler at the end of the race. That was also not a reason why she was taken out of the car for the Cup Series this weekend. The team made it clear that that was not a reason or a factor. What was a factor, though, NASCAR says, is her performance and quality of driving was not up to par for the Cup Series standards, and I guess as of extremely recently, they started putting very strict boundaries on who they allowed to race in the series and who they do not. I have opinions on this. I'm going to be very light, kind of dust over them a little bit, but I want to start by talking about a driver, Derek Hope, for a second. I know I saw a lot of people comparing the situation to allowing Derek Cope to race in the Daytona 500, and I'm going to break that down a little bit. So my question is, how do you allow drivers like Derek Cope, who hadn't run in the Cup Series in a while, I believe, for I think 3 years prior to his Daytona 500 start this year, how do you allow him to race in a plate race like the Daytona 500? I think you can argue this point by saying, one, Cope raced his way into the 500 during the duels, but that still leaves the question, how was he given the opportunity to race his way into the duels as opposed to someone else who has actually been active in the Cup Series for a few years? There's a question there that I don't have the answer to. It's just a speculation. It's something that I'm never going to have an answer to, but something to ponder upon. And as we know, breaking down the first point, Derek Cope did race his way during the duels into the 500, but then he crashed on lap 3 into lap 4. Point made. He raced his way in, but he crashed out in the first 3 or 4 laps. Cobb has raced pretty much every single weekend in the Truck Series for the past few years. And I think it's longer than a few years. And no, she isn't a top 25 driver, but she still has recent experience weekend after weekend. Point 2 is that this is a plate race in a super speedway race, and that can be very dangerous. I said that super speedway races like Daytona, they are not forgiving. And for having a first-time Cup driver racing in those, no matter how recently you've been driving, is pretty dangerous. And the reason you can kind of discount the Cope argument going back to that is Cope has been in the Cup car before. If you want to follow that argument, he has been in a Cup car before in his career. Out of his career, he's driven one. We know drivers like Cindric and Briscoe made their first Cup Series starts on plate races, obviously, and then all the rookies, of course, will go to the Cup Series starting at the Daytona 500. It's nothing new for them. But I think you can argue that Cindric and Briscoe, because Cindric raced in the 500 this year, racing his way in during the duels, you can make the argument for them because they went from an Xfinity car to a Cup car. That's not as big of a jump as you go from a truck to a Cup car. I mean, totally different cars there, totally almost different universe. So you're not making that big of a jump from Xfinity to Cup as you're making from trucks to Cup. All this to say, I do understand NASCAR's decision. They want to keep Jennifer Jo Cobb safe. They also want to keep the rest of the field safe in case she wrecks out and then that collects cars with her and then that people get injured. You want to keep your drivers safe. And especially if she doesn't have recent experience in the Xfinity Series, she's going to be jumping from, as I keep saying, a truck to a Cup car. And that to me just doesn't make sense on a plate race. So that is the point that makes sense to me. But then what doesn't make sense is we have drivers I think that could be much worse at driving than she is in the Cup Series, unchartered, chartered, whatever, racing in these races, wrecking out like 5-6 times every single race. That's an exaggeration, but if you look back at Martinsville and other things, it's not an exaggeration for a few drivers there. So having Jennifer Jo Cobb in this Talladega race wouldn't be any different. I can see that argument as well. I've seen that made on social media. I understand that. But then here's where things get very interesting. Literally, I think a few days, 2 days after Jennifer Jo Cobb made her announcement last week that she would be racing, making her Cup debut at Talladega, Harrison Burton came out and said that he would be making his Cup debut this weekend at Talladega in the 96 car for Gaunt Brothers Racing. I hate to switch the subject from kind of somber and frustration to excited, but I'm very excited to see Harrison Burton make his Cup debut at Talladega. He is a full-time Xfinity Series driver making his start, so that jump makes sense. It's just kind of a punch in the gut to allow Burton to race, but not Cobb, though I know his experience in Xfinity, and he's won many races. He's a top 10, top 15 driver, top 5 driver even, on a weekly basis, so it makes sense. Performance-wise, this jump makes sense. So that is all the updates I have now. That's the end of the story. We'll talk about where Harrison Burton's going to start when we line up the field, but let me know in the comments below what you think about the situation, how you feel about it. If you're uneasy, let me know in the comments below. But now it's time to talk about this weekend's race at Talladega, starting with some race facts. Talladega Superspeedway is a 2.66-mile track. The race is 500 miles long, or 188 laps long. Stage 1 and 2 are 60 laps each, and the final stage is 68 laps, with a competition caution thrown somewhere in Stage 1. Those are your race facts. Now we're going to line up the field to see how these drivers are starting. We're also going to throw in some paint schemes into the mix just because, Talladega is going to have some fun ones. So let's start by talking about your guy on the pole, Denny Hamlin, with position number 1 locked in. Number 2, we have Joey Logano. 3, Truex. 4, Byron. 5, Bowman. 6, Bell. 7, Blaney. 8, Elliott. 9 is Kyle Busch, and 10 is Brad Keselowski. I want to talk about real quick Kyle Busch's paint scheme. We're bringing back the lightning bright green interstate battery scheme. A cool one I actually like. I usually don't like really bright green paint schemes, but this is one of them that I like. We're bringing that one back. We're going to talk about all these other drivers turning in the middle to back of the field. We're going to start by talking about Kevin Harvick, who after crashing out very late in the race last weekend, I think he finished 26th, I believe. He's going to be starting 16th. You'll see his paint scheme here. I'm really excited about this. If you knew me in real life, you would know that my favorite animal besides a red panda and maybe a bear is a dog. I freaking love dogs, and seeing this paint scheme made me so, so happy. I'm excited he's going to be running the Bush Dog Brew paint scheme this weekend at the Geico 500. I also want to talk about Erik Jones starting in position 22. I love this paint scheme and the colors. This is a statement coming from Richard Petty Motorsport about this paint scheme saying, quote, "As an homage to the original Trailblazers, the Tuskegee Airmen, at Erik Jones, number 43, at USAF Recruiting, Chevy isn't just a visual cue, but a reminder that great things happen when we celebrate our differences." A very cool paint scheme, a very visually pleasing paint scheme to celebrate that group. Very cool to see him honoring them. Then we have Numa starting in 28th. I want to talk about his paint scheme because I really like the Castrol paint scheme. I know I mentioned when we used to talk more about paint schemes in the past, the very clean white Castrol carbon neutral paint scheme that Brian Newman was using to promote carbon neutrality. I really love that one. I really like this one. I love the kind of, I guess, Christmas colors, the green, white, and red. I know we only see this on the Hunt Brothers pizza paint scheme, which I also equally love just as much. But I think this one will be a very cool one to see going around on the track. I think Brian Newman's going to do pretty well at Talladega. I know he's starting in 28th, but he's a pretty good plate racer, so I will not count him out this weekend. Starting right behind him in 29th is Ryan Preece. I wanted to mention this paint scheme because I don't like it. I think I have to throw one in the mix that I just don't like. I like Reese's peanut butter cups. I've grown to love them throughout years, but having it on the back corner of the car like that, I am not sure if that was a good choice or not. I really don't know. I don't care for it. I think it's a very odd placement on the car. Enough said about that. Let's start with 10 places behind Brian Preece. Starting in 39th, we have Harrison Burton in the Dex paint scheme for his debut in the Cup Series. Not starting at the back of the field, but in 39th, and I think if he doesn't wreck out, he has a good shot at getting a top 20, top 15 finish if there's still 20 cars left in the field at the end of this. And I think he has a good shot because I think drivers that are making their debut or are top maybe 30 drivers in the field, either at these superspeedway races they manage to wreck out, or when the whole field wrecks out, they manage to be in it at the end. So I think he could have a good shot at getting a pretty decent finish for his Cup debut this weekend. And if we're going to talk about what odds Harrison Burton has, let's just talk about the odds of all the drivers going into lining up the odds. We're going to start by talking about the last drivers to win at this track was Ryan Blaney, who won the first Talladega race of the season in June, and then Denny Hamlin won this race in September. The active driver with the most wins here, I am shocked, but Brad Keselowski with 5 wins at Talladega Superspeedway. I don't even know how that's possible. The only one coming close is teammate Joey Logano with 3 wins. So, like I said earlier, Brad Keselowski won the Pro Invitational Series, the iRacing, was not a big surprise to me because he has 5 wins at this track. Moving on to the team I see having the most wins at Talladega Superspeedway is Hendrick Motorsports with what I counted 13. And finally, the manufacturer with the most wins, no surprise here, Chevrolet with 41 is what I counted. Ford has 30 and Toyota only has 4. I want to talk about this Toyota stat in particular with only having 4 wins at the Speedway. I want to shed light on it and why we don't see Toyota topping the manufacturer charts for wins at really any of the tracks that I've talked about. Well, Chevrolet and Ford have been around in the sport for a long time, and Toyota joined the sport back in 2007. Also, I don't think we see Toyotas winning super speedways a lot, just not Talladega, but Daytona at all, is because you'll see teams like Hendrick Motorsports and you'll see RCR Racing, they'll team up with their manufacturers. And the manufacturers that come in greater numbers, they tend to work together at these tracks to draft, because when you leave the draft, you fall back into the pack, and because Toyota only has 5 or 6 cars in the Cup Series, the Toyotas do not have enough of them to draft on their own. So they have to figure out who they're going to work with, Chevy or Ford, and they're pretty much at the whim of those teams. It's, hey, if you draft with us, if we let you draft with us Chevys, you really have to help us out. We're not going to help you, you have to help us out. So that's how I see it in particular as to why the Toyotas really don't win at super speedways. And the only way they can really win, and we saw Denny Hamlin win last year in a shootout at the end, and we will talk about that in a second, but it was only with that shootout where the Toyotas really have a shot and will take a shootout opportunity in a crazy good pit stop, especially to get those Toyotas to the front row when it's all over with the race. The Toyotas really have to be on the front row at the end of the race in order to make something happen, because if they're not, no one's going to work with them. A whole pack of Chevys is not going to be like, hey, Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr., we want you to win, so we're going to push you forward. They're going to get you out of the way. So really the only way these Toyotas have a chance at winning these super speedway races is if they start literally the final either shootout to the finish or the final 3 laps on the front row, and they can make something work. That's really it. That's all I see it working as. History has shown that to be pretty factual, I would say. But again, I can't reiterate this enough about super speedway races, is that stats for this race really don't matter. I mean, Brad winning 5 times at this track is hard to ignore, but I will say starting order doesn't really matter either because it can shuffle so much during the race. And this, even though Denny Hamlin has the pole, and I'm like, that's pretty good for a Toyota, that's not going to matter when it comes to the end of the race unless literally there's no movement and there's no wrecks and he's able to stay at the front and his strategy doesn't even matter. Like, the stats I'm reading to you, they're interesting for this race, but I don't think they're going to have as big of an impact as they usually do on normal race weekends. That being said, I'm going to name a race winner in a long shot win going into the race Sunday because with the super speedway race, you always need a long shot win. There's always going to be somebody that you do not expect to win these races. We saw with Michael McDowell. Even though it wasn't as unexpected, if you look at the stats, it was still a pretty big shock to everyone's system when we saw him win that race. I want to give my race pick first, and some of you might think this is a long shot win, not just an actual winner pick, but I don't feel it's that way. Based on his performance last year and based on his ever-increasing good finishes each weekend this season, I think Matt DiBenedetto could win this race. Last year, I thought he had it. We all did. Of course, Denny Hamlin beat him to the line by 0.0023 seconds, which set him up for an incredible and heartbreakingly close runner-up finish. But then the last lap, he forced. And if you look back at the clip, yeah, it does look like he kind of booted William Byron below the double yellow line, which is a penalty. So Matt DiBenedetto was given a penalty, and they finished his race, scoring him 21st. But he was so close last year, that doesn't necessarily mean he'll get it done Sunday, because, you know, everything's wacky at Talladega. But with his upward trending stats, I think this is his best shot to get a win and lock himself into the playoffs, because I think he's going to have to either continue to have these really good finishes, or he's going to need a win. I think he's still in a position where he could get in on points, barely get in on points. But I think if he wants a guarantee, which I think any driver is going to want, he's going to want that win. Now I'm going to say my long shot win. My long shot win is Bubba Wallace, and I know he has shown strength at super speedways, incredible strength. So, like I said, you can flip DiBenedetto and Wallace, but I think it's a long shot win because he has a new team this year, and they're not doing so hot. They're not really gelling together as well as I think he thought, or we thought. He's in a Toyota car, which, like I mentioned, gives him a pretty big disadvantage because they don't have many friends in the field. The small but mighty manufacturer here, but I think the only shot he has at winning is based on his past experience with really good super speedway finishes as long as he doesn't wreck out. He has statistically finished pretty well at these super speedways, so he is my long shot win going into this weekend. Now if you want a true long shot win, if you want someone who doesn't historically have good times at super speedways, I'm going to look to Daniel Suarez. Could be in victory lane. I honestly don't know. He's been really good with his team so far. He's only had one top 10 at Talladega, and he has led at least one lap at this track, so, I mean, for a new team having success these past few weeks, he could get it done. I don't expect him to, but I'm going to call it now, him being my long shot win, and if it happens, I can say I was right, but I have no clue. Those are my race-winning picks. Let me know in the comments below what you think. I do think we're going to see a new season winner or a first-time winner for sure this weekend. I don't think we're going to see anyone have a double win, or I guess in Martin Truex Jr.'s case, a triple win this season so far, but we will just have to find out. So tune into the Geico 500 this Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of Above the Yellow Line, the show where we talk about all the updates, theories, news, recaps, and more of the NASCAR Cup Series. I am incredibly hopeful and excited for an action-packed race weekend after Richmond. I'm hoping Talladega delivers. If you cannot watch the race, follow along on my Twitter page at @TaylorKitchen_ for lap-by-lap coverage on Cup Series race days. I will dabble in lap-by-lap coverage for the other series occasionally, but I can always guarantee the Cup Series, so check me out on there for race weekend coverage and for daily NASCAR news. Also check out the Podium Finish for great content, including super fun driver interviews, race recaps, and previews. I love working with that team there, so make sure you check them out and support them. For now, that is all. Thank you all again for supporting me and this channel, and until next time, I'll see ya.